Good morning. So first off, I'm going to try something. I got a mic, because a couple of you were complaining. I don't know if this is going to work any better. So the upside to the mic being here is my voice will be stronger. The downside is I don't think I'll pick up any of you. So I'll try it today. If you like it better, I'll keep it. If not, I'll go back to that one. But I think this one actually might work better. Okay? All right. Anthony, got a brief announcement, please?
Good morning. My name is Anthony Fontana. I'm on the Board of Advocates. And today at 5 p.m. in the Treese courtroom, we'll be having a meeting about the South Texas Mock Trial Challenge, which is a tournament that our school puts on every year. About 30 teams from across the country come, and each of those teams needs a witness. And so we get students from our school to perform the role of witnesses for these schools. So if you're interested in doing that, if you volunteer, you get an hour of credit that you can apply next semester. When you have 30 plus hours, you can add it, and tuition will pay for it. The second thing that we're going to talk about this evening at 5 o'clock in the Treese courtroom is a study abroad program in Scotland, another thing for advocacy that Baylor University Law School puts on. We send people there every year. It gets you a good jump start into doing mock trial and advocacy in general. The same thing with the mock trial challenge. If you think that you want to be involved in it, this is a great opportunity to just participate without actually having too much skin in the game. You get to see how it goes, you get to act, you get to play the role, and it's really fun. So if you're interested, there's a meeting this evening at 5 p.m. in the Treese courtroom.
And one note, if you miss my class, it's not excused. No, I mean that sincerely. I enjoy people participating, but when 20 people miss a class, it's very bad. So please do keep that in mind. The same for all of your other classes. It's a bizarre thing in South Texas that you're actually getting credit to miss another class, but I'll leave that to them. But the thing in Scotland sounds pretty good.
Yeah, you won't miss class for Scotland. You get credit for that too. But
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So I appreciate all of you came on Saturday, but half of you came. For those of you who didn't come, about half of you have watched the video. Please do so by the end of this week. That is before Friday. I would hope you've done it by today. If not, get it done by the end of this week and email me, and you'll be excused. So this, I think, will be our only Saturday class this semester, but it lets us keep right on schedule. Any questions before? Oh, your Langdell. Heather told me the information for your first session. I have to announce it. It's going to be on. I got the room right here. Okay. 1 second. I want to make sure I get the room number correctly. The room number will be on February 2nd in room 516. The schedule says 2 o'clock, but I understand your prior Langdell begins at 1:30. So Heather will start right when the other one finishes. I think she's going to do back-to-back, so that way you get home a little bit earlier. So on February 2nd at in room 516. Got it? She's going to be going over some of my old midterms, which I strongly encourage you to attend. It'll put you in a much better position for the class. All right? Any questions? Any on your minds? Yes, sir. You have your name card there?
Oh.
Yeah, thanks. Just I'm moving away from the seating chart. I like the name card thing, so it just helps me know who you are much better.
When you guys were going over Lopez, or United States v. Lopez, I didn't hear anybody ask a question on how Texas's new law on allowing campus carry coincides with the federal statute stating that you are not allowed to carry a firearm on the school grounds.
Okay. So the Gun-Free School Zone Act, I believe, only applies for K through 12. The federal Gun-Free School Zone Act, I think, applies K through 12.
Is that
Texas,
the amended version from 97?
I think both of them are. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the Texas law, I think, only applies to higher education institutions. I'm pretty sure on that. You can check on that later if you want.
So doesn't that raise the question of why hasn't anybody filed suit? As far as, because the argument was made by Brenner that
File suit against what?
filed suit against the state of Texas.
Well, Texas, well,
Or no, not the state of Texas, but to call into question the not necessarily the constitutional muster of the statute, but to just kind of its validity.
are you challenging the federal or the state statute?
The state.
Why can't Texas enact that statute?
Well, looking at Brenner's argument.
Brennan.
Brennan.
I mean Breyer.
Breyer's argument for, in his dissent, it makes sense that if you allow students to carry firearms into the classroom.
Why can't the federal government enact this Gun Free Schools Act? What power are they relying on?
Well, the Commerce Clause.
Okay, does the state need to rely on the Commerce Clause to enact the law?
No.
No, they don't. So the Lopez analysis is completely irrelevant.
But if an institution is receiving federal funds.
But there's no federal law requiring that. See, the Breyer opinion was premised: can Congress use its commerce powers to regulate a gun in a school zone? Right. The state of Texas doesn't have any similar constraints, and there's no federal spending program prohibiting campus carry. Right. There's no federal prohibition for Texas doing what it did. Right. I think, let me take your question a step further. What if Congress passed a statute saying any college that allows campus carry will lose funding for research? Is that what you're getting at?
No, because then that gets into your argument that you made on another case where you're making support conditional.
Right.
Coercive.
So let me ask you a third question. Could Congress pass a law requiring state institutions to ban guns on campus?
I think the argument can be made if they could.
Well, do your reading for Thursday. They can't. Congress can't tell a state to legislate. They don't have that power. Congress can criminalize something on their own, but they can't force a state to legislate. If Congress wants to send FBI agents to a school and arrest someone who's carrying a gun, they can do that. But they can't commandeer state officials from enforcing federal law. That's prohibited. Make sense? Okay, good. Other questions? Is that a hand or a scratch?
Sorry.
That's okay. I never want to miss anyone. Nothing else? All right. So our lecture for today, you notice I only assigned one case, which I'm sure you were all excited about to realize how many pages it was. The lecture for today focuses on a very significant case decided in 2012 concerning the Affordable Care Act. 2010. This is a case that I more or less started my career on, so it's a little close to home. It was actually the subject of my first book, but I'm not here to sell any books. I don't care if you buy it. I'll give you a free chapter indeed. This case combines virtually every aspect of everything we've covered this semester. It's a remarkable case. It combines Commerce Clause, Necessary and Proper Clause, taxing power, spending power, and the role of the courts in our separation of powers. It combines everything in a single decision, in a remarkable decision. And unlike most cases where you more or less know what's going to happen, this one threw virtually everyone, including this guy, for a complete surprise. So it's easy enough for us to talk about it. Yeah, it's his opinions in your book. I edited it down. It's nice for you to read. But what I want to impart to you on this class is what it was like living through this case. It was a 2-year process, and I want to take you through every step. And doing so will give you a much deeper appreciation of how this case developed. And I'll start off with a little story, if I may. I graduated law school in May of 2009. The ACA passed the Senate, as we'll discuss, in December of 2009. So I didn't have law school only a couple months. And I did well enough in common law. By the way, I got a B+ in common law. If people complain about the grades, my professor's not a very good friend. I always give him crap about it. But I got a B+ in common law 1. So grades are not that important. They really aren't. Sure, this is why I don't give multiple choice, because it was a completely multiple choice exam. I bombed it. But when I was in common law, right, I graduated law school in 2009. If someone had asked me, can Congress pass a statute regulating health care which requires people to buy health insurance, I would have told you, yeah, why not? The decision not to buy health insurance is an economic activity. if you aggregate lots of people not buying health insurance, it'll have a substantial effect on prices nationwide. Yeah, why not, right? Indeed, this is not a hypothetical. In November of 2009, as the ACA, it's also called Obamacare, as the ACA was moving its way through Congress, I was at a conference in DC, a conference of the Federal Society. This is a conservative and libertarian group. And there were some lawyers there who I had known, and they were saying, yeah, we got to think about this healthcare law, we got to do something. And I'm like, guys, this looks pretty constitutional to me. And then one of these lawyers said, Josh, you have this very influential blog, why don't you write something on Obamacare? I'm like, well, because Congress can do it, there's not really a problem. But I, in my youth, my naivete, I didn't quite see what some of the people saw, including Randy Barnett, who's my co-author, and who you've seen his video now. I keep speaking, now you've seen him. There were scholars who recognized the way to distinguish Raich and Lopez and Morrison from the ACA. Whether there's a good distinction or not, we'll get to that later. But they put forward a credible argument. And this was an argument that didn't only resonate among law professors. God, who cares what law professors think? But it's an argument that people, random regular folk, right, could understand. It was a simple idea. Congress can't regulate inactivity. Congress can't make you do something. If you're already doing something, Congress can tell you how to do it. But they can't make you do that something in the first place. Now, when this argument first started popping up, they were ridiculed. They were laughed at. Professor said, any lawyer who puts his name to that should get Rule 11 sanctioned. Right? They said that. Anyone who puts his name on that pleading should get a Rule 11 sanction. That frivolous, right? That position ultimately garnered 5 votes in the U.S. Supreme Court. So what I always use this story to tell is, don't ever assume stasis, that things stay the same. Right? Never, ever, ever assume that. Because smart lawyers, during the last presidency, during this presidency, can take ideas that might seem crazy, might seem off the wall, and through various mechanisms, make them seem not so crazy, and put them on the wall, so to speak. That's what Jack Balkin at Yale describes it as. And this process is remarkable. Again, when you're living through it, you don't quite see it. But I'm going to now walk you through this process. And this will be probably a lecture, not a going around the room. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Anything before we start? I'll call on you back on Thursday, but this will be mostly me. I might call people a little bit, but mostly me talking. So the ACA is truly a challenge that combined all 3 branches of government, the presidency, the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court, and they collided over the meaning of the Constitution with respect to health care and health insurance. Now, it should come as no surprise to people in this room that health insurance can be very expensive. And I always have at least one Canadian or European who's like, why don't we have national health care? Well, we don't have it here, right? It doesn't exist. There was an effort to actually bring it forward in the 90s now. Every year this question gets more dangerous. Does anyone know what this picture represents? Thank you. Yes, okay, a couple of you. Eventually, no one will know. Yes, it's just that woman who reads, who tweets about angry whatever. Oh no, bad. Whatever the phrase was. Yeah. So in the early 1990s, in 1993, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton was assigned to chair a task force to propose health care reform. This plan, which was dubbed Hillary Care, or the Health Security Act, if you want to be cool, would have given basically every American access to health insurance. The law, though, never made it past the initial proposal. There were a series of advertisements put on TV. These are called the Harry and Louise ads. Anyone remember these? Yeah, a couple people, yeah. That number will dwindle as I keep teaching. The Harry and Louise ads were trying to attack this bill, and what you had was a husband and wife sitting around the table, and the husband said, I don't want this complicated government policy. I like my doctor. I want to keep my doctor. I don't want to have some sort of bureaucrat get in the way of me and my health care. These ads were so effective. In the span of a few months, the popularity of Hillary Care dropped, and it never made it into law. So that was the last effort to reform a healthcare system until the inauguration of President Obama in 2009. One fun fact, in January of 2009, when the president was sworn in, January 20th, he and the Chief Justice had a little bit of miscommunication. The way it usually works, the Chief Justice says a sentence for the oath, and then the president repeats it, and the chief says a sentence. The problem was they're both very smart people, and they both memorized it. So Obama didn't actually need to hear the cue. The problem was Roberts broke at different points. They started talking over each other, right? And it was a disaster, right? These are both very, very smart people. So what ended up happening was they did a do-over the next day. Lest there was any doubt that he was actually sworn in as commander-in-chief, the next day at the White House, they did a do-over. There was actually litigation brought by a service member who complained that Obama was not the true commander-in-chief because his oath was not valid. It didn't go anywhere. But I swear, constitutional law matters, my friend. Indeed. Obama shares a record with FDR as the only president to take the oath of office 4 times. I mean 4. Well, he did it twice there, right? He did it twice there in 2009. In 2013, January 20th, which is inauguration day, fell on a Sunday. You can't hold an inauguration on a Sunday. So he did the real oath on the 20th of the Sunday, and he did a fake oath the 21st. So he had the oath 4 times. Okay. He holds that record with FDR, the only 2 terms in office. And one of President Obama's primary initiatives in office was going to be health care. And the bill became known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Now, no one calls it patient protection, that just dropped out. So now people just call it ACA or just Obamacare. Now just a brief note on the word Obamacare. Depending what time we're in, it's either offensive or not offensive. When the law wasn't doing so well, people said, don't call it Obamacare. And the law was doing well, it's like, yeah, we're going to embrace Obamacare. So it goes back and forth. I labored over whether to use a phrase, and I've come to peace with Obamacare, but I'll stick to ACA for class today. The process, though, wasn't only political. And as I mentioned, in October and November of 2009, there was strong political opposition to this new law, but there was also a constitutional dimension to the ACA. Was this law within Congress's powers? And I mentioned at the outset, it's not enough to persuade some law professors, right? Persuade some law professors that the law is valid. That's not enough, okay? You have to actually persuade the people.
You have to persuade the people that the law itself is valid. And there was a group that popped up. You know, it wasn't actually during the Obama presidency. It actually popped up at the end of the Bush presidency.
A group known as the Tea Party. You don't hear about them much anymore. They still exist. They're around, but they're not quite as prominent. And the general mantra of this group was opposing big government, and whatever form, you could argue specifics, they opposed big government. And very soon this group latched onto the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, as the target, right, the basis of their opposition. And they not only argued that the Affordable Care Act was a bad law, they did, right, they hated it, right, they didn't want it. They also argued that it was unconstitutional. And when various social groups, movements take on an argument, and they say that this is unconstitutional, that makes the argument a little bit different, right? This is not a mere policy dispute. This is actually a legal argument. And throughout American history, various groups have used similar methodologies, right? The abolitionists, they argued that slavery was unconstitutional, that the word wasn't mentioned in the Constitution, there's no slavery, it's unconstitutional, right? Suffragists, they looked to the 14th Amendment. All persons shall not be denied equal protection of the laws. That means women can vote, right? Various groups have looked to the Constitution to animate their motives, and this is one of the most prominent examples in recent memory of this actually working. And as the Tea Party grew, it grew and grew and grew. So much so that in March 2010, I think there were 20,000 people marching on Washington opposing the ACA. This was the day it passed out. I was in D.C. that day by chance. I wasn't at the rally, but I walked around. I took some pictures. One sign I'll never forget. One sign. This guy had a sign It said overturn Wickard v. Filburn. And I was just stunned because, like, you know, before law school, had any of you heard of Wickard v. Filburn? No, I had not. I didn't know what the hell Wickard was. And this guy was walking around, I think he was between the Capitol and the Supreme Court, if I remember correctly, saying overturn Wickard. So, like, maybe people knew they're talking, maybe they just held a funny sign, but they had some sense of constitutional law, whatever it was. You know, I wish I'd taken a picture of that one. I didn't get it, but it was burned in my retina, right? So, the constitutional arguments were germinating at the time. But politically, the opposition to the ACA had no legs to stand on. Okay? Why? In the 2008 election, the Democrats did quite well. And by the time we got to the summer of 2009, there were 60 Senate Democrats, 6-0. And as I'm sure you all know well, the filibuster, which is this procedure to prevent bills from running away, can be beat with 60 votes, right? If you have 60 votes, you can end debate on any motion and vote. Republicans basically said, we're not backing this bill at all. We're going to do it. So Majority Leader Reid said, okay, that's fine. We can pass this bill with 60 Democratic votes and put it on the floor for the House to vote on. So this was how the ACA, grossly compressing, made it through the Senate. The actual bill is about 2,700 pages long. You think anyone actually read the bill if they voted on it? No one actually read it. In fact, Senator Max Baucus, who chaired the Finance Committee, admitted, I don't read bills, I pay people to do that for me. Okay, so one day maybe one of you will work for Congress, and you can read a bill your member votes on. It's a lovely design. But in fairness, reading a 2,700-page bill in a fairly short time is impossible. You're not going to get it. So, whatever. No one actually read the bill. It passed on the Senate on Christmas Eve 2009, December 24th. Oh yeah, Kenny.
Do the Supreme Court justices just read like the relevant parts of the bill, or did they have to?
So during the arguments, Justice Scalia made a joke, and he said it would violate the 8th Amendment to make someone read the entire Affordable Care Act. It'd be cruel and unusual punishment. There are people who've read the entire bill. I know them. They do exist. They're sadists of the worst sort. I gladly admit I have not read the entire ACA. I've read chunks of it, but it's a really long bill, lots of it. I mean, it's very hard to read either. It's not like an opinion. It's like insert these words at this line of this bill, right? Delete these provisions. I mean, you can't just read it straight through with like a cup of coffee. There's a lot involved. Anyway. The bill passed the Senate December 24th, 2009, Christmas Eve. They never voted Christmas Eve, but they had to get this done. Why? The process had to have in mind. That was not meant to be. As it would turn out, the 2,700-page version was basically a draft. Right? It was never meant to be final. Everyone knew the House was going to totally change it. They couldn't. Why? The previous summer, Senator Kennedy of Massachusetts, a Democrat, had died. He'd been sick for a long time. He passed away. The governor was able to appoint a replacement, and the replacement voted on Christmas Eve for the ACA. However, in January of 2010, a special election was held to fill the seat in Massachusetts. A Republican won that seat. His name was Scott Brown. This drastically changed the process because the Democrats had not 60 votes, but 59 votes. And with that, they could no longer break a Republican filibuster. At this time when Scott Brown won, a lot of people in Congress thought, uh-oh, we're screwed, right? We decided to go this alone, 60 votes, we lost our 60th vote. We're done. Not so fast. In the House, Speaker Pelosi decided we can go forward with this, right? They basically said, all those changes we're going to make, we're not going to make those changes. We're basically going to vote on the Senate bill with a few small number of changes, right? Nothing significant. And we'll just go ahead with what we got. Again, the December 24th, the Christmas Eve bill, that was a draft. It was never meant to be final. But the Affordable Care Act we have today is the draft, right? The bill that controls, 12% of the U.S. economy was never meant to be final. The Republicans can do nothing to stop it because there's no filibuster in the House. There's nothing equivalent to it. But it allows both houses to pass different versions of the bill and then vote in each other's bill. It's a complicated process, but lets you bypass the filibuster. By a vote, 219 to 210. I'll do quickly, I'm going to make it 0. It was a straight party line vote. In fact, about 3 dozen Democrats voted against the bill. I think a lot of the problems with the ACA stem from this very scene, this very initial vote, because people said, I have no part of this, I have no problem trying to kill it, which a lot of people probably still want to do. We'll get there later. But the bill passed, and it goes to the president's desk for a signature. Now, one fun fact, you see over here with all these pens? Okay, why are there so many pens? These pens are given out as mementos, as tokens, right? So the president signed his signature with about 35 different pens, right? Each stroke of his signature is a different pen. He hands them out to museums and wherever else. So it takes him a very long time to sign the damn thing, right? Trump just uses a marker. It just doesn't matter. Did you all see the video I sent at the very end? Yeah, he just, whatever. By the way, State of the Union tonight, just watch it. It'll be fun. But anyway, so Obama signs it, and with this, I think it was 30 pens. I have to be off on the number, but there's a lot of pens. And the worst one is the O. The O has 4 different strokes, and it looks very choppy. But he said he actually got better. Yeah,
but this time last year when Trump was first coming in and he was signing a bunch of, whatever they call
Marker.
it was, each one was a different pen, he gave them out as gifts.
Oh, did he use the pen?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like 20, 30 different
Okay,
strokes,
yeah.
and then he would pass them out.
Then yeah. But for the tax bill, he used the magic marker.
Executive rules.
Sure. Very good. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, but they, like the Smithsonian wants one. They send to museums. Okay. So at this point, the president's smiling. He's all happy. Like, yeah, I passed healthcare reform. I'm awesome, right? But the legal challenge is only getting started. If any of you ever go to a law firm this summer, or maybe after your second summer, you'll learn about speed in litigation, right? And you've heard this phrase, race to the courthouse. This was a race to the courthouse unlike any other I've ever seen until the travel ban, right? But at that point, within 8 minutes, 8 minutes of Obama signing the paper, lawsuits were filed challenging the ACA. Maybe it was 10 minutes. I'm pretty sure I was right around under 10 minutes, right? Lawsuits were filed right away. In fact, signed, and they sued right away. No. Nowadays, it's all we ever see. We see people suing immediately when the person signs something. That's a common strategy. But back then, that was pretty brash. And the argument was, did this law, the Affordable Care Act, violate the Constitution? Did Congress have the power to implement this law? So there were, as the book divides it, there are 2 aspects of the ACA. There are 2 major aspects of the ACA. The first was, or actually I'll do the second one first. Now, what's Medicaid? Now I know Medicare, there's an R in there, is for senior citizens, right? Think of retirement, right? Medicare is for seniors. When you get to be 65, before you get to 65. So the Medicaid is a policy for
The elderly, we care for the elderly and we aid the sick.
Oh, I like that. That's good. We care for the elderly. We
aid the sick.
We aid the sick. That's very good. Thank you, Abdul.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So Medicaid is a federal-state partnership, right? The states administer the program, but the feds give them money. And as we learned last week, when the state gives you money, they can put strings on it. So before Obamacare was enacted, the states had a lot of discretion about who they covered under Medicaid. They had a lot of discretion. Generally, I'm generalizing, they would come below. So let's say a family of 4 that makes $20,000 a year, I'm making up the number. If you make below, right, you're above that wedge between 100 and 133%, whatever that number happens to be. The federal government would pay almost all of those percent. So the states are saying, look, expand it, we'll pay for everything the first 4 or 5 years, and then after that, great deal, right? Sounds like an awesome deal. The states, well, what happens if we don't want to expand, right? We just want to stick with what we have. Can we keep our funding that we already have? And some government bureaucrat wrote the wrong letter at the end of this litigation. It bit the government very hard. And this letter from this bureaucrat said, if you don't expand Medicaid, you...
Yeah, John.
How's that goal? Isn't it
The amount of funding was very different.
the same? That's much more than 5.
No. 5% of highway funds entire budget.
So the letter that was sent was very problematic for the government later on. But they sent this letter. Most people didn't pay much attention to the spending clause issue. I sure as hell didn't. In fact, the reasons Jonathan identified, most people thought, oh yeah, this is dull, right? No, it's not that much money. But Florida brought this complaint, and every single court ruled against them on this until the U.S. Supreme Court. So the first question was whether the spending clause expansion ran afoul of the opinion in Dole. But that was number one. That was number one. The second issue was one everyone paid attention to, which was concerning the law's individual mandate, or what is often called the personal responsibility provision. It says, if you don't purchase qualified health insurance and you...
Okay. So can Congress... Does Congress have the... Asked me this exact question in November of 2000. Smart-ass law student, right? As I said, see it. Too much weed, right? Oh, too much wheat. How's it different? If you grow too much wheat, you get fined. You have health insurance, you get fined. The argument developed like this. In economic activity, which one has a substantial effect in
commerce. If all the farmers start growing local weed, or wheat as it were, right? It's Congress forcing people to engage in commerce, right? That is a problematic part. Wait a minute. What about necessary and proper, right? Can't Congress say this is a scheme, like in Raich?
for it to do so. But it's improper to hear the people. Now I'm dead. Reviled. Again, people said, if you put that in, go to... But, wait a minute, Josh. Even if and they can't enact out can stuff if it's in trust. For example, Congress can put a tax on whiskey. So why can't Congress Sure. We do it all the time. People who buy certain we use order incentivize various. So why can we construe it? This makes me. Every year I read this case differently this year. It hasn't happened yet. You think I'm joking? But
The unemployment aspect of it. Like there are two separate parts to the Social Security Act, but the court essentially upheld Social Security as being valid and that it was essentially a tax on the people.
So there's a good story I recount in my book. Can you imagine this? I'll answer your question in a minute. There were age pension, what we now know as Social Security. And they were very divided about how to draft it in Congress for it to survive Supreme Court review. So there was either a Tea Party or a cocktail party, I can't recall what it was, but there was some party in Washington, D.C., and Frances Perkins was a solicitor of labor. She was a Secretary of Labor for FDR. And she was there with Chief Justice Stone, right? And if you can imagine this, she asked Chief Justice Stone, you know, we're really worried about the Social Security bill, right? how do we draft this bill for it to survive Supreme Court review? And he whispered in her ear, my dear, the taxing power is all you need. And it was on that basis that the Supreme Court, because Congress drafted it as popular. That's why they called it a penalty in 18 different places. But what Chief Justice Roberts said is, because we can, Stewart Machine, these other cases that Brian mentioned, do come in.
Rather than just the medical and the billing industry directive and avoid all of this, because then it could just been the Commerce Clause easy.
Well, how would they make people have insurance under that argument?
But isn't the whole argument that the insurance is high because the medical billing is high to cover everybody else? The people who can't pay.
Right. So let me answer your question this way. Right. If Congress wanted to impose a single-payer healthcare scheme, basically Medicare for all, right? So Medicaid's bill saying you have Medicare return 0. At the age of 0, you have Medicare. Could they have done that? Tax, because when you pay your problems. But if they'd done like with Social Security or Medicare for everyone, it actually went on a safer separation of powers ground. There are, by the way, exemptions for the individual mandate for religious objections. There are some objections to it. Very narrow, though. All right, with me. So these arguments were advanced by my colleague, Randy Barnett, who you've seen in the video, and he was the one who argued Gonzalez versus Raich. The crowning image, the enduring legacy of the Obamacare issue was this. Buy broccoli. Now, it's not eat broccoli, right? I think if the government tried to make eat broccoli a violation of due process rights, it'd be cruel and unusual punishment. I actually, because of Obamacare, I don't eat broccoli anymore. I've given up on the vegetable. When I look at it, I think of John Roberts. I get this feeling of I can't. So I've stopped broccoli. It's no more. No one will make me eat it. But it actually had 11 enduring things on Family Guy. It was on The Simpsons, right? But what's the argument? If the government wants to make us healthier, and they determine that there's some sort of health reason why broccoli is going to make you healthier, can they impose a purchase mandate to make you buy it? Right? To eat it. But if they make you buy it, maybe you'll eat it, maybe you won't. Same way. Can they make you buy a gym membership? Maybe you'll use it, maybe you won't. Right? The New Year's Eve. Can the government make you buy a GM vehicle? At the time, General Motors was in U.S. ownership at the time, right? Basically, the government owned General Motors. Well, they find that Detroit is failing. Subsidize Detroit. So these are the issues that popped up. Anyway, oh, by the way, there's the signature. You can kind of see the O is really jagged. The rest of it's actually not bad, but the O, you can really tell there are different pen strokes. So we had this race to the courthouse. And the first court to rule on this matter was in Virginia. The suit was actually brought by Ken Cuccinelli, who was the Attorney General of Virginia, and he was actually the alum of my law school. I've known him for years. He was able to get one of the first judgments. He said the mandate was unconstitutional. Okay? But he severed the mandate. What does that mean, severed? He said, well, even if the mandate's unconstitutional, we can leave the rest of the law in place. The government said, no, you can't do that. If you take out the mandate, right, the entire Affordable Care Act will fall apart. Why?
No money.
If people aren't being compelled to buy insurance, they'll free ride. They'll just wait till they get sick. They can sign up for a policy, not pay anything extra because they have a pre-existing condition, and it's going to fall apart. So the Obamacare can't survive without it. It will stabilize. And the fact of the matter is most people were never encouraged by the mandate to buy insurance. It wasn't very encouraging. Virtually everyone who wanted an exemption got one. All these hardship exemptions. So the mandate was an absolute failure. It never actually worked as it was designed. So it's gone now. But all these arguments that the law can't exist without the mandate, we now know are just whatever, posturing. I mean, maybe the arguments were good, but they haven't borne out by history. But with this, the president was not happy because his signature achievement was just halted in the courts. And it was fairly unpopular. It's only now, the last year or so, creeped up about 50% popularity. Okay. The second judge to rule on it, this was the lawsuit brought by Florida and 25 other states. These 25 states pooled together and brought suit against it in Tallahassee, I'm sorry, not Tallahassee, Pensacola, Florida. Now, Florida's attorney general, right? Forget Erie. You are encouraged to forum shop as much as you want. To the extent that you have a choice of venue in different states, you have a client. Your client wants to win. You forum shop. So I don't hold it against Florida for filing in Pensacola. I don't hold it against Texas for filing suit in Brownsville. I don't hold it against California for filing in San Francisco. It's rational. It's completely 100% rational. Judge Vinson in Florida held that not only was the mandate beyond Congress's commerce powers, it cannot be severed. He said the ACA is like this Swiss watch, and you can't take out just one piece. You have to take out the entire thing. So you had a judge now who ruled that this was beyond Congress's commerce powers to engage in this act. The President, again, was not very happy because you had two judges who ruled against the signature law. As you know, the case now goes to the courts of appeals, and it will be argued in 4 different circuits. The 6th Circuit, which is Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, that's where I pay the clerkship. The 4th Circuit, which is West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. The 11th Circuit, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Not in the 5th Circuit. Texas lost out on that one. They filed in Florida instead. And in the little bitty DC Circuit, came like 4th, I think, or 4th, yeah. The case will be argued constitutional litigation. Clement is probably the best lawyer on earth right now. If you want to listen to really good arguments, listen. If you want to be good, emulate him. He's really good, really good. The first argument in the 6th Circuit, which actually was held in favor of the government. One of the opinions, though, was by Judge Jeff Sutton, who was a Bush appointee, where this strange opinion where he said, because the ACA doesn't require everyone to buy insurance, right? Some people already have insurance. We can't consider it, right? We can't strike it down because it doesn't impose a mandate on everyone. That is, because it might be constitutional for some people, we can't strike it down for everyone. Very strange argument. He did not want to resolve this case in the merits. I don't like it very much, but no one paid much attention to it afterwards. Anyway, Obama was happy. He had a victory. The next one, though, was the big show. You take a victory over it can get, right? The next one was the big show. This was the one in the 11th Circuit, Atlanta. And this considered the appeal from Florida, right? The Florida appeal. This had 25 states backing it. This, in a joint opinion by Judge Frank Hall, Frank is a female name, and Judge Joel Dubina, the court found that the mandate was unconstitutional. Why? It was not a regulation of commerce. It was not a regulation of commerce. Instead, it was compelling people to engage in commerce, and therefore it can be distinguished from prior precedents. It was not governed by Wickard, nor was it governed by Raich. The significance of this decision, though, right, is that you now have what we call a circuit split. A circuit split of authorities, which basically required the Supreme Court to take it. You had one court going one way, another court going another way. So the circuit split. I had, in my Infinite Wisdom blog, there's no way the Supreme Court will take this case, and I was wrong. So I've been wrong about everything. Don't ever listen to my predictions. My predictions are garbage. I don't make them anymore. I'm always wrong. I'm always wrong about everything. So don't listen to my predictions. But look, all predictions are wrong. I'm humble enough to admit it. Most people, like, they always do this thing where they look at pundits, predictions they make, and they rank them a year later. They're always wrong, right? No one knows what's going to happen. No one's smart enough to know. But at this point, it was going to the court. There are 2 other courts of appeals I want to dwell on briefly. The 4th Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond ruled, and they upheld the mandate, but there was one opinion that actually reached the tax arm. They said, look, even though this is not labeled a tax, it's a tax, right? And the President and Congress have the power to tax people for going uninsured. No one paid much attention to that because it wasn't a tax. The court just read it in a very strange way. Anyway, the President was happy with that one. The next one that I want to focus on briefly was the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And the DC Circuit also upheld the ACA, so it was 3-1. But there was a separate opinion by Judge Brett Kavanaugh, who you will find is on every shortlist of the Supreme Court. This one you might not be happy about. Judge Kavanaugh wrote this very, very long and complicated and boring opinion. I might be one of 5 people who have actually read it in its entirety. Very few people probably have. And what he said was like this. Congress didn't enact the mandate as a tax. They didn't do that. But they could have. And if we just change a few sentences here and there, this is very close attention to Kavanaugh's opinion. In fact, I did interviews for this book, and they said, yeah, once Kavanaugh told us, like, yeah, let's see what Kavanaugh said. So when he gets nominated to the Supreme Court, this might come back to him. Or might be why he doesn't get nominated in the first place, but we'll see. He's a Kennedy clerk, and they're dangling him because they want Kennedy to retire. That's right. So it's like Kennedy bait. Was it with Wile E. Coyote bait, you know, with a Roadrunner bait, right? They're trying to bait him to run into the tunnel. That's really just a brick wall. I have too much fun. But in any event, this case goes to Supreme Court, and the justices are there. President Obama, by that point, already made his mark on the Supreme Court. He had appointed Justice Sotomayor as his first pick to replace Justice Souter. And a couple years later, he appointed Justice Kagan to replace Justice John Paul Stevens. And you can see here, they're all happy, they're all smiling. Times weren't always so good. Oh, perfect State of the Union, yes, what's tonight? You're beautiful. At the 2010 State of the Union was a very momentous occasion. About a week before the Supreme Court decided the Citizens United case. This is a case involving campaign finance reform. During his speech, President Obama said, I'm going to paraphrase, the Supreme Court overturned 100 years of precedent. As we say, fake news. It wasn't true, right? The camera was right on him. He never went back to the State of the Union after that. In fact, just sit there, we can't clap, if just sit there, be stoic. So tonight, Justice Ginsburg's not going. She has a commitment. I suspect had she had a different president, she might have not made that commitment. We all know the State of the Union happens, basically the second week in January. You know, you can narrow this down. But in any event, it'll be Roberts will be there probably. Kennedy always goes. Breyer always goes. Kagan's there. I don't know about the rest. Gorsuch might be there. I'm sure he'll tag along. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, so it goes to the Supreme Court. But what that episode at the State of the Union illustrates is that President Obama was not afraid to criticize and judge the judges, so to speak, go after them for their rulings. And we would see later that this actually came to be. A couple of you have asked me about attending arguments at the Supreme Court. There's no way to reserve tickets in advance unless you're special. For most people, the only way to get inside is to wait on the street outside. There are 50 tickets given out every morning around 8 a.m. Arguments are at 10. So every day of arguments, they give out 50 tickets in the street for the first 50 people who are online. Now you ask, Josh, how long do you have to wait in line to get a ticket? So the arguments for the Obamacare case the line lasted about 72 hours, right? So you'd have to get to D.C. about 3 days in advance to get a seat at the arguments. 3 days in advance. That's a lot. For the same-sex marriage case, I think it was about 4 or 5 days for the first person online. It's cold in D.C., right? I've done the wait my fair share of times. It's not fun. And in fact, I actually once froze my butt off. It was 2010. It was like sleeting that night. It was so cold. And I had like an overcoat. My jacket was not warm enough. And I'd never been that cold in my life. And the worst part is you can't bring a tent or anything. They don't let you. That's all you can do. And I'll give you a pro tip. Around 3 in the morning, the sprinklers come on, even in the winter. So you get a nice wake-up call. It's very disconcerting when you finally fall asleep. Okay. The other bad part is they're professional line waiters. What do I mean professional line? People pay someone to wait online to save them spots. That way they don't have to actually get cold at night. Okay. Usually these are homeless people. It's actually really sad. They're getting taken advantage of, right? They might be paying like a few bucks and then for the seat. It's actually a really bad situation. Supreme Court can't do much about it, at least in the public line. But the bad part of the line waiters is that often one line waiter saves about 2 or 3 spots. Oh. So one time I was number 40, give or take, on the line, and I closed my eyes for 20 minutes. And woke up and I was like number 47. Because, you know, people save multiple spots. So I almost didn't get in. I've always gotten in. But now, and same for you, if you're a member of the bar, if you're stayed for 3 years, you can be admitted to the Supreme Court bar. Okay, if you want, in 3 years, I'll sponsor you, my pleasure. But you can sponsor admission to the Supreme Court bar. So you get a special line for members. It's still long, not as long, but you get in usually a little bit easier. But I didn't go to the arguments that year. I was actually working at a real job. I'm like, now. So I had to watch from home. Wait a minute, I can't watch, right? There are no cameras. There are no cameras. And there's no live stream either, right? They release the audio the same day. On rare occasions, they did it here, but on rare occasions, they release the audio on the same day. But there's no way of recording what goes on inside. Instead, you have only drawings. So here's a better picture of the line. You see people basically soaking wet. They're in slickers. They're, you know, these. You can't have a tent. You can't pitch a tent, but you can have a tarp over you. That's like, you know, the closest you can get. It's basically drape tarps over themselves. It's a very uncomfortable place. And also, the Supreme Court police will not enforce order. Irony, right? You say, he cut me in line. It's like, all right, whatever. So there's no norm to enforce it. It's a very dangerous place to be. I mean, no one's going to rob you, but you're going to lose your spot, and you'll wait there for 4 days and not get in. The nearest bathroom is at a 15-minute walk. It's at Union Station, which is open all night, but you might lose your spot. So, you know, I managed each time I was there, but it's tough. Now I don't have to do that anymore, thankfully. Anyway, so the arguments for the Obamacare case were somewhat novel. Usually cases get 1 hour. Right? Most cases are argued for 1 hour. The Obamacare cases had almost 6 hours of oral argument time scheduled. That much time hadn't been allotted, I think, since the 50s or 60s. It's a very long time. And there will be 3 days of argument. Okay, so let's get these straight. Day number 1 was the taxing power. Day number 1 was about the taxing power. Day number 2 was about commerce and necessary and proper. Right, so day 1 is taxing, day 2 is commerce and necessary and proper. The third day concerned the Medicaid expansion and this issue of severability, right? Whether you could chop off the mandate for the rest of the argument. There'll be a double header. They have arguments in the morning on severability, and in the afternoon they do arguments on Medicaid expansion. This was a marathon of preparation, and only a handful of lawyers argued the entire thing, which is amazing, right? Paul Clement, I think, had 3 of the 4 arguments, or maybe 2 of the 3 arguments. It was really stunning. And the case will be argued before the 9 justices. Again, no cameras, so this is all you got, right? This is the only thing I can show you what happened inside the courtroom. Just see what's going on here. The justices sit over here. They're in seniority order, so the chief is in the middle, and the most senior associate, Sebelius, to his left, and then Kennedy, and then Breyer. I'm sorry. Scalia, Kennedy. It's not right. It's not right.
That's good.
No, I don't get for examples. Anyway, you guys aren't lining up anyway. But always at the end, the most junior justices, Sotomayor and Kagan, are always at the end. The most junior at the end. I'll figure out later. The press sits over here. The bar sits over here, and the lawyer arguing stands here. See a little left turn right there. It might look huge in this photo, but it's really tight. I mean, you're like squished so close. The lawyer is maybe 4 or 5 feet from the bench, and just think of your peripheral vision. You can't see the people on the wings without turning your head. So there's a lot of mechanics to even argue there. It's a very tight, close room. This picture does not do justice. I mean, it's like I've sat in the front row before. So again, day number 1 was this guy, Solicitor General Don Verrilli, and Paul Clement arguing for Florida, the NFIB. And the question the first day involved the taxing power. Now, there's a point that I didn't mention. It's not in your book, but I want to discuss it briefly. We are now in January. Has anyone filed their taxes yet? Of course not. No. I think, no, yesterday was the first day. They will know. You did? You filed already?
Oh, I did. Yeah, yesterday.
Wow. You're good. There's this clip of The Simpsons where Ned Flanders is at a New Year's party, and the ball drops and clock goes. I was like, oh my God, it's New Year's. I have to do my taxes now. So I'll leave it there. So The first day, though, involved, the IRS says, Josh, you owe this tax and we want you to pay. You have one option of what you want to do. Actually, two options unless you work with Snipes, right? You should have one option. Your option is you pay the tax and then you go to tax court and you sue for a refund. You are not allowed under the law to say, you know what? I'm not paying my tax now. I'm going to sue the government, litigate this for 9 years, and then maybe I'll pay it later, right? Could you imagine how our tax system works if we could do that? It'd be a disaster. No one would ever pay their taxes because they would simply wait for litigation to occur. So Congress passed a statute called the Tax Anti-Injunction Act. The Tax Anti-Injunction Act, which says the federal courts will not have any jurisdiction to hear tax suits unless you've paid it first, right? Paid until 2014, right? It didn't go into effect until 2014. This lawsuit was argued at the court in 2012. So wait a minute. How can you challenge a tax in court if you haven't paid it yet? How can you challenge a tax in court if you haven't paid it yet? The simple answer is you can't. So this is where the court's opinion, the Anti-Injunction Act, it's not a tax. Right, just follow me here. For purposes of the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, it's a penalty. It's not a tax. Therefore, you can challenge this in court now, and you don't have to wait till 2014. Now, Josh, what the hell do you mean? Why would the government argue? They wanted to resolve this now in 2012, about 3 or 4 months before the election. For purposes of the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, it's a tax. Yeah, let me explain this to you one more time. For purposes of the Tax Anti-Injunction Act, it's a penalty. The same provision is a tax, though, for the Constitution. Yeah. For the Anti-Injunction Act, it's a penalty. For the Constitution, it's a tax. That was Don Verrilli's argument. You are all laughing, but that is the basis of the Chief Justice's opinion, which almost everyone missed. I missed it. And no one was like, oh, is that what he was doing? And if you go back and you read the arguments from the first day, the very first day, Verrilli's making this point saying they're different. And that the court doesn't have to read it the same way. That Congress can describe things one way for a statute, and the court can read it another way for the Constitution. Did you hand up?
Yeah, did anyone move for a Rule 11?
Ah, you're funny.
Or
It's a brilliant argument, though. This was Brett Kavanaugh's argument. This was what Judge Kavanaugh suggested, right? This wasn't sanctionable. I mean, look, I'm going to defend it. I think it's crazy, but I'm going to defend it for you, right? We can be lawyers. We've got to do both sides. When Congress writes a statute, they can classify things however they want for their own statutory regime, right? But for the Constitution, the courts decide. And it's no problem if Congress wants to call things something one way. It says, okay, you're fine, but you can't call that for the Constitution. So basically this argument involved the court saying, we'll defer to you on your statutory scheme, but not on your constitutional scheme, which is what the saving construction so held. But this was the argument that Don Verrilli, right? That Don Verrilli pushed effectively. This was his leading argument. He knew this was going to save his butt, right? Because the Commerce Clause, it's, you know, there's arguments there. But this one they can be saved on. So in day number 1, he effectively argued that there is a penalty for purpose of the Anti-Injunction Act, here the case now, but it's a tax for purpose of the Constitution, here and just resolve this issue now. Yes, sir, David.
What was this Anti-Injunction Act?
It's a law that prevents you from suing on a tax debt until you've actually paid it, right? You have to first pay the tax, and then you can go to court to seek a refund. You can't sue it at the first instance. Yeah, Jonathan?
So that's what he's talking about.
According to the saving construction, no, it doesn't. That for a statute, you can read it one way, but for the Constitution, read it a different way.
But it's the same case, so shouldn't you be consistent with them in the case?
Nope. That's Robert says you don't have to be. That because you have I'll get there in a minute, but to answer your question, different statute. But now you see what this opinion makes me sad every year, right? When I read this, like, don't do it, Roberts, don't do it. You know, save me, your only hope, right? But no, it never happens. Always goes to the dark side. Anyway, so the argument for the first day went very well for the government. They got that point across. The second day, though, didn't go so well for the government. Why do I have a glass of water on the screen? I'll explain to you. If you ever have an argument for a court or a judge or whatever, don't drink immediately before you go up. Why? Sometimes water. Don Verrilli is in the Supreme Court. Most important argument ever. He gets up there, takes a sip of water. Silence. You hear this clinking of glass. He takes another drink of water. He was literally choking. The dude couldn't breathe. The water went down the wrong pipe. Can you imagine this, right? Just think about it. You're arguing the biggest case of your life, and you can't get a damn word out. Because you can't, it was silence. I counted about 6 or 7 seconds, maybe you counted differently, but I mean, that must feel like a lifetime to that, right? A lifetime. But let me now tell you, the mark of a professional advocate, he drank some water, right? He then repeated his opening verbatim. He had his opening statement committed to memory. Verbatim. So even after he choked, I mean, not like he literally choked, he resumed his argument as if nothing happened. That is what you guys have to do as lawyers. I don't think I have the fortitude to do that. That's amazing. I can't put myself in from one year to the next. They say different things apparently, right? But he was able to repeat verbatim exactly. You gotta laugh at yourself. He can repeat verbatim exactly what he said. So that's impressive. His feat on the second day was a little bit different. Okay? So the entire time we've been talking about, is the mandate constitutional, right? Is the mandate constitutional? Really went in there and made a different argument. And I want you to follow me here. He said, ready for this? There is no mandate. What? He argued, there is no mandate to buy health insurance. What do you mean there's no mandate? We've been arguing for like an hour. When we talk in this case, he says, there's no mandate to buy health insurance. The law doesn't require you to buy health insurance. Instead, it merely taxes you for going uninsured. Wait a minute, Josh. Wait a minute. No, that doesn't make sense, right? There's no mandate, they tax you for going uninsured. What the hell is the difference? I'll tell you the difference. The government, when they're regulating, can penalize you for doing something, right? If you pollute, if you dump some, oil in a stream or something, right? They can pollute, they can fine you, they can penalize you, no problem there. What if you're not doing anything at all? You're sitting around on your butt at home watching TV, right? You're not doing anything. Can they fine you for doing nothing? Now, the dissent and the majority argue about that. I'm not concerned with that quite yet. But the question is this. Can they tax you for merely existing as a person? And the answer to the question is yes, they can. Congress has the power to tax you for merely being a person. Now, this is different than income tax. Income tax comes when you earn a salary. But Congress can impose what's called a capitation, right? Basic cap, like head, right? They can impose a tax on every person. It's basically based on population. So what the Solicitor General argued is, there's no mandate here to buy insurance. Instead, the government will simply tax people who lack insurance. Now, there are a lot of problems with this argument, which Roberts bypassed along the way. But the argument is this. It's called a penalty, right? We already said in the first part of the opinion, it's a penalty for this Anti-Injunction Act. But is the court obligated to read it the same way for the Constitution? Roberts says he is not so obligated, right? That this Blodgett case Jonathan mentioned a minute ago, right? That courts have an obligation to read statutes in a way that they are upheld, not such that they are invalidated. Everyone with me, right? That they have an obligation to read it in a way that will be upheld. Okay? What about this title that says requirement to buy insurance? Well, think of it this way, right? Usually when Congress imposes a law, let's say you can't dump oil in a stream. An easy one, right? Usually Congress doesn't exempt people from that law. It doesn't say, you can't pollute the stream unless you're a Native American, you're sick, or you're poor, right? Congress usually doesn't exempt people from requirements, but the ACA has a lot of requirements. So Robert says, would it make sense to exempt some people from a requirement? No. Okay. And then there's the method of how this money is being paid. It's paid to the IRS in the same fashion as you would your income tax. So Robert says, it looks a lot like a tax in the way it's paid. And then here comes the key. Can the government throw you in jail for not having insurance? This was the key representation that Verrilli made. He said no. There are no consequences for going uninsured beyond paying the penalty, or tax, whatever it is, right? The only consequence is you have to pay this penalty, right? If you don't pay your taxes, you might go to jail. But the act of going uninsured is itself not the basis for any punishment. So Verrilli made these arguments which Robert sopped up, right? Like a puppy with a bowl of milk, right? He just took them. Right? This wasn't Roberts. It was really Verrilli and Kavanaugh who made this up. Okay? Roberts looked to all these various factors. It's paid to the IRS. There's no punishment involved, right? You can read it reasonably as a tax as the basis for a saving construction. So, to answer the study guide question, did Roberts hold this was a tax? No, it was not. And that's the critical point. He read it as a tax to uphold its constitutionality. Right? Now, why did he bother Thomas necessary and proper? Why did he do this? According to Roberts, the reason why he had to go through the motions of commerce necessary and proper was to justify the saving construction. Right? You don't get to a saving construction like this is a last-ditch effort. Right? Unless everything else has failed. Okay? Everyone with me? All right. So Verrilli was very successful in the taxing power argument. He was very successful in the tax power argument. He did not do so well, though, on commerce and necessary and proper clause. Why? The government could not identify a limiting principle. Okay? What does this mean, limiting principle? What's a limiting principle? I know what was wrong in this picture. I missed Thomas. I didn't count Thomas, who was leaning back. So Thomas was there, and then okay, that's fine. I just realized what was wrong. He often leans back. He doesn't speak during arguments. People always say as a scientist doesn't know what's going on. He says the arguments play very little role, which is generally true. John Marshall never asked any questions. He wanted to use that one, but I don't like Marshall, so it's a bad example. The government could identify a limiting principle. In other words, if the government can make you buy a product and shove you into the stream of commerce, what can't they do? Once you're in that stream of commerce, there basically are no limits of what Congress can regulate. And once you're in the stream of commerce with necessary and proper involved, there are really no limits. So what the court did here is basically what they tried doing in Lopez and Morrison. They drew a line. And they said that the power to regulate commerce presupposes commerce exists. In all of the prior decisions of the court always spoke of regulating economic activity. Economic activity. The decision not to buy health insurance was outside that class of activities. It was not an activity at all. And they said there was no basis for regulating economic inactivity. This was the basis of the title of the book I wrote, Unprecedented, that Congress had never, ever, ever done that before. They just had never done that before. And then what about necessary and proper? This was the most surprising element of the case to me, right? Because even if this is not an activity that can be aggregated for substantial effects, why can't Congress say, if they didn't reach, that you have this nationwide health insurance scheme? And in order for it to work, everyone has to be insured, right? The court rejected this. finding that it might be necessary but not proper. And the chief put this phrase, which I want you to highlight in your notes, a great substantive and independent power. Great substantive and independent power. I want to explain what this means. In McAuliffe, Maryland, right, beginning of the semester, it's up at the bank. Can Congress charter a Bank of the United States? Can't do it under commerce power, can't do it under taxing power, can't do it under anything else. But they can do it under necessary and proper. It was called an incidental power. That is, the power to regulate commerce and the power to tax allows certain other secondary powers, one of which is creating a bank, right? So think of, you can do all these big things like regulating commerce. Through necessary and proper, you can squeak in something related, right? An incidental power. All right. How big can that incidental power be? What Roberts says, citing John Marshall, is it can't be a great, substantive, independent power, right? You can't do this great thing under necessary and proper merely to go after a foregoing power. So let me walk through this. Can Congress regulate health insurance? Yes. Can Congress erect a scheme to keep prices in healthcare markets low? Yeah, they can do that. How much can they do to get there? What the court says is they can't go too far. They can't impose a purchase mandate as a means to keep health insurance prices low, right? If they want to fine a farmer for growing too much wheat, that's fine. If they want to criminalize the local possession of marijuana, okay, that's not a big deal. But making someone enter the stream of commerce is not a proper exercise of federal power, precisely because it's a great substantive and independent power, GSIP, right? A great substantive and independent power. It goes too far. Has the court ever before struck down law under this great substantive independent power? Twice. Case we read for class on Thursday. So remember these: Prince, United States, and New York versus United States, right? Those cases were found not to be within Congress's necessary and proper powers. Roberts states it more clearly in those cases. I don't think those cases understood it. Scalia did, but I don't think New York did. Okay? So the court, Roberts, right, says, I reject the commerce argument, right? I reject the necessary and proper argument. So this requires me to consider a taxing argument. And it's not a tax. But for purposes of the saving construction, okay, everyone get the Roberts taxing opinion. Again, that's controlling, right? It's controlling because the way the votes work like this, it's very strange. On the commerce power argument, there were 5 votes. We had Roberts, and they had the joint opinion of Scalia, Kennedy, Roberts, and Thomas. So there were 5 votes for Commerce Clause unconstitutional. There were 5 votes, wrong hands, right? There were 5 votes for necessary and proper, 1 and 5, right? But there were also 5 votes for it to be upheld as a tax. So there were 5 as a tax. What's the end result? Obamacare survives, right? Everyone see those numbers. It's confounding. But the rub, though, I keep saying, 1 and 4, 1 and 4, right? The joint opinion of Scalia, Roberts, Kennedy, and Thomas never once mentioned the Chief Justice. Anyone notice that? Right? They never once mentioned the Chief. Why? I don't know if we'll ever find out the right reason. But my suspicion is they were pissed off. They were mad at him. Now, in D.C., and we know rumors are always true, right? They're in my book, maybe they are, who knows? The sources I have, which I think are pretty decent, made a slightly different point, right? And the slightly different point is that he was convinced at the outset that it was within Congress's commerce, and it was not within commerce and necessary and proper power. But he was on the fence in the taxing power. And at some point later on in the process, he decided, I'm going to call this as a tax. The story goes that the Scalia opinion was trying to persuade Roberts, come back, don't join the dark side, right? Come on. There's still 5 votes because Roberts mentions the Scalia opinion. I agree with them also. So the Blue Book signal, they said, we're all together, we're one happy family. Okay. Ginsburg, though, wrote what's effectively a dissent here on commerce and necessary and proper. And she was very angry, you can tell, right? Justice Ginsburg argued that this takes us back to before the New Deal. What's that vibrating? Who's vibrating? Turn it off. Whoever it is, turn it off. I don't care. Ginsburg argues that this takes us back before the New Deal, right? That this is the sort of decision that happened before 1937, where the court tries to create these artificial boundaries between what's commerce, what's manufacturing, what's direct, what's indirect, right? These are not the sort of decisions courts should be making. I don't know that she's wrong. I go back and forth in this, right? I think I can argue it both ways. On the one hand, I think this follows from Raich. Raich said they can regulate classes of activities. This was not a class of activity, therefore it's outside the scope of Congress's powers. Then again, even though there's convinced, I go back and forth depending what day of the week it is, right? But there are arguments, I think, on credible arguments both sides. This is not Rule 11, though. By no sense is this a sanctionable argument. That one, those professors embarrass themselves, right? I'll name names. One of them, Lawrence Tribe at Harvard Law School said these are just politicians in robes who are voting to use this commerce argument. And Akil Amar at Yale said, the judge who wrote the opinion of Florida is like Roger Taney and Dred Scott. Oh, remember that. Just don't forget that. You have better grades and better rankings, but they're not smarter than you. They often miss stuff because of the bubble they live in. Something people don't quite appreciate until you leave those institutions. But Ginsburg said this is not how we do things. As for necessary and proper, right? Ginsburg says, we've never done this before, right? We've never struck down a law as not being proper. Now, you have the Prince case in New York, but this is a very clear instance where government's regulating individuals. In Prince and New York, the government was regulating state governments. This was a law that applied to individuals. And Ginsburg said this has never been done before. But Ginsburg says, because I more or less agree with the majority, right? Because I more or less agree with the majority in the taxing power, I'll join along, right? I don't think we need a statement construction, but I'll buy with it anyway. That got them to 5 votes. And with that, the ACA survived in large measure. Okay? By the way, this is one of my favorite pictures I found so far. This is Justice Scalia with the head of broccoli. They actually asked about broccoli a couple points during the arguments, and Ginsburg put a lot of effort into broccoli in her opinion. She, a crown of broccoli. I didn't know it was apparently called a crown. I didn't even know that. But I don't eat it anymore, so not my problem. Okay. Are there any questions from the class about the commerce or the necessary and proper taxing power before I go on to the spending power issue? Yes, ma'am.
In Ginsburg.
Stephanie, yes.
Yes. In Ginsburg's opinion, which review Filbert,
good.
is that regulating the activity of
Good,
growing
okay,
or the
yeah.
inactivity of not buying it in the market?
Yeah, right. So let me ask you a question. Stephanie, you raise your hand. Is a decision not to buy health insurance inactivity at all, according to Ginsburg?
But to doing nothing. And then she goes on to say, because at some point you're going to need it, whether it's you're giving birth or you're dying, and why should we foot the bill then for you at a price that we've been covering the whole time so you can enjoy it only when it's convenient?
Okay, Clinton, you
Against that a little differently. I would say the decision not to buy insurance is essentially self-insuring.
Okay, both of you are on the right track. Yeah. What Ginsburg says is going uninsured is self-insurance, right? You can either pay for medical care now through a form of insurance premium, or you can pay for it later at the same point. Roberts' response to this isn't the best. He says, well, that may make sense to economists, but that's not how the framers would have seen the issue. And I'm paraphrasing the argument, right? That the framers were practical statesmen, and they understood government. And they can't look at this as purely economic lens. But the question that Stephanie asked is a very good question. That is why a lot of law professors said this is Rule 11, right? It's such a stupid argument that it defies economics, which I think is what you're getting at, right? Okay. But Ginsburg said there's no inactivity, right? People who go uninsured are simply deciding to pay for it later rather than now. Now, one other response to this is, I can go back. I debated this topic more times than I can. I can actually do the debate of both sides and believe both sides. But the other argument is everyone needs health care, but not everyone needs health insurance. Oh. And that the majority tried to distinguish between health insurance and health care. That people may want to pay out of pocket, they may not need insurance. The other side says, well, but you still, turns out, under the ACA, have visits to emergency rooms decreased? Actually, no. People with insurance go to the ER even more so it's not to pay for it. So it's actually increased costs in some respects. go back and forth, nonstop.
But did she address that issue of self-insuring and saying, well, that's building all of these inferences that just because you self-insure, you'll actually set the money aside for that instead of being prepared?
Well, but that's piling inference upon inference, which Congress can't do in Lopez. Right? Congress can't pile inference upon inference. Yeah, Brian?
Doesn't the government actually bring financial facts when they're stating their argument as far as bringing the Commerce Clause and the necessary and proper argument into play when they're arguing for the Supreme Court? Because they talk about how even if you don't have insurance, you're going to pay if you don't have insurance, but the cost is bared by the hospital, and then they are then subsidized.
Oh, yes.
And then it's like a trickle-down effect, okay? So this person gets, the hospital gets subsidized by A, and then A gets subsidized by B. It all eventually comes down to whoever's buying the insurance is the one that's ending up having to pay for all those subsidies.
The government had those numbers, and the court basically said, doesn't matter, right? That's still not a proper exercise of federal power. Even if the numbers are correct, right? Even if this mandate will help decrease costs at hospitals as a whole, and the trickle down you mentioned, that's not enough to make people buy in the first place. If Congress is troubled by this unsubsidized care, they can just impose a tax and give the money to hospitals, right? There are other mechanisms by which Congress can deal with this trickle down effect you mentioned, short of a mandate. And that's just Scalia's point. And just in hindsight, the fact that the mandate was repealed and hospitals haven't gone out of business is proof that this was not the only way of doing it. To which Ginsburg responds, that's not the test, right? We don't put them saying this is the only way you can do it. Is this a convenient way of doing it? Which is why the proper element became so much more important, right? What is the stringency, right? Is this James Madison absolutely necessary for Alexander case? The majority, I think, did on this front go a little bit back towards the pre-New Deal era. But very good question. Anything else in the mandate with respect to commerce, tax, necessary and proper, Anti-Injunction Act, etc.? Yeah, this case has it all. I mean, it's a perfect teaching vehicle. It hits every conceivable clause you can imagine. All right, let's move on next to the expansion. I mentioned earlier that virtually every court to consider this issue, every year, they got to do what the feds ask, 80s. The terms were X. And now you're changing the terms to be Y, right? We got to cover more people. They say, look, this is not a clear, unambiguous statement of the rules. And the government said in response, well, as it turns out, every 2 years Congress makes a new appropriation, and every year you got to deal with the new circumstances, right? This is not if you join it once, get the money forever. It's you join it each year, we comply, you get more money. So they didn't actually lose on the 4 factors of Dole, right? They lost on that line between where persuasion becomes coercion, right? This line, which was alluded to by Rehnquist, Jonathan's favorite, right? Where's that line of coercion, right? Where from states that do not comply with the expansion. In the case of a higher state's budget. In other words, the state did not, if you put a gun to someone's head, right? You say your money or your life. Your money or your life. Is there a choice? Anyway, the reason why this bit is funny is there's a radio segment where a guy says, your money or your life. So the court says states did not have immediate address this, right? They were basically being dragooned, what a wonderful word, dragged, right? Dragooned to comply with this new expansion. And this the court found was unconstitutional. On this count, it was 7-2. Only Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor have upheld the Medicaid expansion. It's entirely will bankrupt the state. States can't be bankrupt here. Puerto Rico can, but maybe not. But if they decline this money, okay? But the vote here was curious. It was 7-2 overall. But the vote split 5-4, or actually 3, 2, and 4 on the remedy. So let me walk you through this, right? Scalia, Thomas, Kennedy, and Alito, the 4. They would have struck down the entire Medicaid expansion. They said it's coercive, it's got to go. That's 4. Then you had 3. Roberts, Kagan, Breyer. They said, well, it's unconstitutional, but you don't have to strike it down. You can remedy it. If you give states the choice of joining, then there's no coercion, right? So long as the state doesn't object, they can get the money. Now you ask me, Josh. There are 4 votes here, and there are 3 votes there, right? Why did the 4 votes control over the 3 votes? On the Supreme Court, if there are no single 5-vote block, there's no majority opinion. Right? If there are not 5 votes on a single issue, there's no majority opinion. When it's 4-3, it's actually 4-3 to 2, right? Because Ginsburg and Sotomayor will have held it all. The court says we take the most narrow position. Okay? Ginsburg says, well, I don't like Scalia's opinion. I think Roberts is actually a little bit better. So Ginsburg joined the 3. So you had 5. Is it again? You had everything, but I like the results. I'm going to join them. So you had 5. So that's why there were 5 votes to allow states to opt into the Medicaid expansion, which is where we are today. What, 6 or 7 years later, 5 years later, I still about 20 states haven't opted into Medicaid expansion, which creates a bizarre thing. So for example, in Texas, we don't have it. So if you live in Texarkana, right, on the border, if you're on the Arkansas side, you get Medicaid expansion. Texas side, you don't. This is a very bizarre circumstance because people who live between 100% and 130% of the poverty line don't get Medicaid, and they also don't get subsidies in the Obamacare marketplace, right? Congress didn't think people in this middle region would need subsidies, so they don't get them. So if you're in this middle region, you're screwed, right? You don't get Medicaid, and you can't get Obamacare subsidies. You're basically in this weird, bizarro world. But that's one of the consequences of this saving construction. So at bottom, what do we have here, right? Let's let me walk through this one more time. You have 5 votes who says that the mandate violates the Commerce Clause. You have 5 votes to say the mandate violates the Necessary and Proper Clause. You have 5 votes to uphold the mandate as a tax under the saving construction. You have 7 votes to say the Medicaid expansion is unconstitutional, but you have 5 votes to let states opt into it if they so choose. Piece of cake, right? Everyone get that? Oh my God. Now, all right, so any questions on the, here, this one explains it pretty well. Any questions on the spending clause aspect of the Obamacare? Dave, is your hand up, sir?
No.
Stretching, okay. Happy you know it. Raise your, okay. Any questions on the Medicaid expansion? Yeah, Quentin?
You said that it was 7 votes.
7 votes, yeah.
Unconstitutional.
Yes. But
5?
a different 5 though. Yeah. But
5
5
votes said that they can opt into it.
yes.
So therefore, it still was unconstitutional,
But
it
it's
didn't get
saved.
struck down.
It was a save. So basically 5 justices agreed to a saving construction on the Medicaid expansion.
Okay.
Right? So even though Ginsburg and Sotomayor said that the expansion is constitutional, she still went along with the saving construction of Roberts. So you have 3 and 2 is 5.
Which made it a saying that it was.
A
What
choice.
was the saving construction?
It was a
of the
choice. The
mandate?
states could opt in if they
choice.
wanted.
Okay.
Because if it was a choice, there's no coercion, right? If states choose, they can't be coerced. Oh, there he goes. So at bottom, there were 2 saving constructions used. In the words of the dissent, the law is rewritten, right? But there are 2 saving constructions used. There was first a saving construction to read as a tax, and then there's a second saving construction to allow states to opt into Medicaid expansion. So at bottom, right, the law more or less survived in its entirety. The mandate remains. The Medicaid expansion exists for states that want it. And again, to this day, I think about 20-odd states haven't opted in, and I don't think they will ever. By the way, remember I said the government covers all the costs for the first 5 years? After 2016, it's only 90% of the costs. Oregon already has to raise taxes to pay for the Medicaid expansion. It's gone far beyond people. Okay, so questions about the opinion? Yes, sir.
Would you please define this concept of saving construction?
Okay, thank you. I didn't do that. I should do that. So courts generally have an obligation to have respect for the separation of powers. A saving construction is a way of looking at a statute that might not be the best way of reading it, but it's a plausible way of reading it such that it's constitutional. So what Robert said is, it's not a tax, right? Congress didn't call it a tax. But if we twist it and we look at the light and we shake around and we cut some words.
Different interpretation. Is that like a valid argument against it, or?
Opt into this Medicaid expansion? Done. 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences. But they can even read that one, it's pretty short. but instead the court rewrote it. And keep in mind, this was 4 months before the election, very close to the time of the election. And a lot of people speculate that the election may have played some role in this, that the court didn't want to be at the center of the election. And as it turned out, the name John Roberts was not mentioned once during the presidential debates, I checked. Ironically enough, though, during the 2016 debates, Roberts was mentioned big league over and over again. They were criticizing, we don't run Roberts because of the Scalia vacancy. So the court's decision to save the political process maybe was successful in the short term, not in the long term. Back to original meaning. Yeah, Clinton.
Follow-up question to Whit's question. Who was Whit's question, right?
Well, the U.S. Code hasn't changed, right? The book, the actual statute's the same, but they change how the courts understand it.
They would have been able to create a final draft of it, then it would have had a lot less issues.
Yes.
And, all right.
Yeah, if the statute had gone through a few months more of debates, I think they would have cleaned up a lot of these issues. They couldn't, though, because of Scott Brown.
Got the wording right and everything else.
I think they would have cleaned it up. Yeah. Yeah, I think they would have cleaned a lot of things up that are really problematic, but they didn't have time. All right. Let me wrap up with a few of the other fun bits of the case. As you can tell, the vote breakdown is very complicated. It's very complicated. Right, it took me an hour and a half to explain it to you. The poor reporters, though. Who are on the street. Now, let me explain to you how the Supreme Court works. They don't announce in advance what the opinion is going to be. The way it works is inside the court, a justice starts reading what's called a handout. He hands down the opinion. He reads a summary. And when he starts handing it down, there's an office in the first floor of the court, and they hand out printed copies of the opinions. I mean, this was like almost 200 pages, right? And there's something called the running of the interns. That's first what it's called. Where the various news networks have interns standing at the ready inside the court to grab the opinion and run onto the plaza, right, where all those people are standing, to hand the opinion to a reporter, right? Imagine this, 3 reporters, some are lawyers, some are not, but these are pretty smart. And the reporters are going to be saying, okay, I got to read this opinion in 5 seconds and figure out what the holding is to go in the air. If you want to read, get my book, I have a chapter on this, it's hilarious. So this reporter for CNN, a guy named Bob Mears, good guy, I may have known him for years, but he just read the first page of the opinion. It's called the slip. And it says, the Chief Justice finds that the mandate is not supported by the commerce and necessary and proper powers. He's like, oh my God, they struck it down. So CNN went wall to wall with mandates struck down. AP, right? Fox News, wall to wall. You can see him on TV reading the first page of the slip, right? If you flip to the next page, page 2, they stop at page 1. So for about a good 17 minutes, right? This is 10:11. So the president was watching CNN. To make this even worse, the Supreme Court's website crashed. Completely overwhelmed by traffic. It was done. It was toast, right? Okay? So the only people who had the opinion were people who had the paper copy. No one can get the PDF, and the Fox News had the same story. Now I'll tell you my own little funny story. Not funny, but sad. I was flying to London that day on a flight from Chicago. I had a conference in London the next day. And I knew this was going to be the day of the Supreme Court's opinion, so I deliberately booked a flight that left at and I was getting on this plane, and we're boarding, and the flight's like, turn your phone off. I'm like, no, I can't turn my phone off. And then CNN just reported that the mandate was struck down. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm seeing the plane, we're taxed, we're literally taking off. I'll never forget it. I got a message from her, G-Chat, and it said, power either. And I was transcontinental 767, flying from Chicago to London, thinking, what's going on? But in hindsight, it was cathartic that I wasn't doing losing some property, but when you lose something you have, it's worse than never having in the first place, right? It's called the endowment effect. When you have something that's taken away from you, it's worse than never had it at all. And we had it and lost it, and it was gone. And it was a feeling that I think to this day lingers, and it's still the cause of animal book. I just didn't write the last chapter. And I had written 2 versions of my proposal and told my agent, okay, this proposal this time, I don't know, hasn't happened yet. But eventually, someone got it. No, it wasn't his fault, because I mean,
Sure.
You got this 200-page opinion, they give you 5 seconds to read it, right? You got to make a snap judgment. But because of this, the agencies have changed their policy reporting. They're much more hesitant, much more conservative. They went with this way too quick. And the worst part was they didn't dial it back. Like for 20 minutes, you know, it's like it's struck down, it's struck down. Then eventually Wolf Blitz's like, I think we have a different report coming in, and then they eventually, you know, walked it back. But eventually, this is the happy Obama picture. He won. And this is the Dewey defeats Truman moment with the CNN on the iPad, mandate struck down. I think Verrilli was vindicated. Roberts, yeah. He was assailed by conservatives like Glenn Beck as a coward. And in fact, as you probably saw in the recent election, the justices were saying, we want to pick someone not like John Roberts. Again, it's hard to say. When Roberts was nominated, he was like God, like this like guy who was chiseled from stone to be a justice, right? He fit the bill perfectly. And now he's just looked upon askance by conservative circles as basically a sellout, that he did something that should not be done. Shortly thereafter, Mitt Romney tried running for president on the platform of repealing Obamacare. It didn't go very far because as governor of Massachusetts, he basically created Obamacare. He implemented a mandate in Massachusetts to buy health insurance. It did not work. He lost the election. I had thought at that point that the Obamacare repeal would end and people would move on. It hasn't. I managed to write another book about it, and I think a third book in a couple of years from now. And then a few months later, President Obama had his third oath of office. This was the January 20th one in the White House. I would love to have heard what he and Roberts were talking about here. It's like, thanks so much. But there we are. All right, let's stop here. All right, questions on the Obamacare case? There was a lot to cover in one class. I can only do it by lecture. Yeah, Ken.
What is the
just give me 2 minutes. People ask some questions. Very rude to classmates.
It's a relevant question, but what is the NFIB? Is it just like a think tank?
So NFIB is a National Federation of Independent Business. States can't sue the federal government directly for things that affect individuals. States can't sue the federal government for stuff that affects individuals, right? States aren't the guardians of their own people in this respect. NFIB was a private group of businesses, and they're also individuals. Now, Kenny's question, why is it called NFIB versus Sebelius? The group that files first gets the lowest docket number, right? Every case gets a new number. They had the lowest number, therefore that's the name of the case. It's very simple. Actually, yes, it didn't turn out so well. Actually, two. So I'll give you the good and the bad one. So Lynn Liberato, who's actually an alum of South Texas, she argued a very good case, and there was this one, I can't remember the case, it was a great line, where there was a Latin phrase, and Lynn's Italian, and Scalia's Italian, and Lynn said this Italian phrase, and Scalia said, is that how you pronounce that phrase in Latin? And she says, that's how we say it in Texas. And it was just this awesome line, and the entire court burst out laughing. It's Lynn Liberato, she's awesome. Second case didn't go so well. The second case was called Lawrence v. Texas. And the the Harris County DA was a South Texas alum. That possibly could have been the worst argument of the 20th century. I'll come back to it when we do Lawrence, but his name was Chuck Rosenthal. He was really bad. Really bad. We'll come back to that later. I'm aware of two. There might be more, but I think there are at least two. All right, anything else? All right, I'll see you all on Thursday. Thank you so much.
No idea.